Some mistakes change your life forever, and for Eliza Turner, hers began the moment she reached for a stranger's horse. Sometimes, the person who catches you is the only one who truly understands why you had to run. At dawn in the blistering Badlands, Eliza, a woman fleeing false accusations, tries to steal from Gabe Holt, a mountain man who left civilization behind years ago. He catches her with his rifle raised, but when she tells him about the crooked sheriff and the rancher who framed her, something shifts in his weathered face. Gabe was once a lawman himself before the law turned its back on him. Instead of turning her in, he lowers his weapon and says, "If you're escaping, I'm coming too." Can two people running from their pasts find redemption together before it catches up to them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days earlier, Eliza Turner sat on a wooden bench in a cell that smelled of mildew and despair. The iron bars cast shadows across her face, and through the single window she could see the town of Belridge going about its evening routines. Lamplight flickered in windows. Families gathered for supper. Life continued, as if her world hadn't just collapsed. She traced her fingers along the rough wood, remembering when those same hands had held chalk, had written lessons on a blackboard, had guided children through their first attempts at reading. Mrs. Turner, they'd called her. The schoolteacher with the kind smile and endless patience. That woman felt like a stranger now. The wanted poster lay crumpled at her feet. She'd read it so many times the words were burned into her memory. Eliza Marie Turner, wanted for theft of livestock. 40 head of cattle belonging to Samuel Cord. Reward $500. The numbers were precise, the accusation clear, and every word was a lie. It had started 6 months after her father died. Jacob Turner had been a surveyor, a man who understood land the way some men understood books. He'd left Eliza a small ranch on the edge of Cord's vast holdings, 160 acres, with a creek running through it. Good water, her father had always said. In this country, water is worth more than gold. Samuel Cord had made his first offer 3 weeks after the funeral. A fair price, he'd called it, though the sum wouldn't have covered her father's debts. When she refused, he'd smiled, that cold, calculating smile she'd come to dread, and told her the offer wouldn't stand forever. A woman alone couldn't manage a ranch, he'd said. She should be practical. Eliza had been many things in her life, but never practical in the way men like Cord meant it. She'd kept the ranch, hired 2 hands with what little money remained, and started rebuilding. The children still needed a teacher, so she'd balanced both lives, rising before dawn to handle the ranch work, teaching through the day, returning to mend fences and check on cattle until dark. Then Sheriff Malik had arrived at her door with Cord's foreman and 3 other men. They'd found 40 head of Cord's cattle mixed with her small herd, they'd said. The brands had been altered, they'd claimed. She was under arrest, she'd tried to explain. Her hands had been moving the cattle to higher pasture. Someone must have driven Cord's stock onto her land during the night. She'd never seen those animals before dawn. But Malik hadn't listened. His eyes were flat, disinterested, the eyes of a man following orders rather than seeking truth. The trial had been swift. Cord's men testified they'd seen her with the altered cattle. The banker, who held the mortgage on Cord's properties, served as a character witness for the rancher. No one spoke for Eliza except old Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store, and her testimony had been dismissed as the ramblings of a sentimental woman. 3 years in the territorial prison, the judge had declared. Her land would be seized to pay restitution. Samuel Cord, in a show of magnanimity, had offered to purchase it for a fraction of its value, sparing the territory the trouble of an auction. She'd understood then, sitting in that courtroom, that this had never been about cattle. It had been about the creek, about water rights, about a powerful man who saw something he wanted and simply took it. The law was supposed to protect people like her. Instead, it had become Cord's instrument. 2 nights ago, a storm had blown through Belridge with the fury of heaven itself. Thunder rattled the jail's foundation. Rain hammered against the roof. And in the chaos, Eliza had noticed what the storm revealed. The window frame, old and rotting, had pulled loose from the adobe wall. She'd waited until Malik made his rounds, until she heard his footsteps fade toward the front office where he kept a bottle of whiskey for long nights. Then she'd worked the frame, pulling, prying, ignoring the splinters driving into her palms. The wood had given way suddenly, nearly sending her tumbling to the floor. The window was small, barely wide enough for her slender frame. She'd squeezed through, dropping 6 feet to the muddy ground below. Her dress had torn on a nail. Her shoulder had struck the wall hard enough to leave a bruise that still throbbed. But she'd been free, or as free as a woman could be, with her face on wanted posters and every lawman in the territory looking for her. She'd run through the storm, staying off the main roads, moving through arroyos and across open desert. Her teaching dress, once a respectable blue cotton, had become tattered rags. Her boots, meant for schoolrooms and Sunday services, had rubbed blisters that burst and bled. She'd drunk from muddy puddles and eaten nothing but wild berries that left her stomach cramping. By the 3rd day, she'd known she needed a horse. Walking wouldn't take her far enough fast enough. She'd spotted the camp at dawn, a single tent, a small fire burning low, and 2 horses picketed nearby. One was a sturdy pack animal, the other a magnificent roan gelding that stood at least 16 hands. The camp's owner was nowhere in sight. Eliza had crept forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd reached for the roan's lead rope, her fingers trembling. The horse had nickered softly, and she'd whispered soothing words, the same gentle tone she'd used with frightened children. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice had come from behind her, low and rough as gravel. She'd spun around to find a man standing 10 feet away, a rifle held steady at his shoulder. He was tall and weathered, with hair the color of iron and eyes that seemed to see straight through her pretense. This was Gabe Holt, though she hadn't known his name yet. She'd known only that she was caught, that her desperate gamble had failed, that this stranger with the hard face and harder eyes would surely turn her in for the reward. "Please," she'd said, and hated how her voice broke. "I need that horse." Most people who need a horse try buying one. His rifle hadn't wavered. "You got money for a horse?" "No." "Then you're stealing." "Yes." There was no point in lying. He had her dead to rights, and they both knew it. Something had shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. "You're running from something." "Someone," she'd corrected. "A rancher named Samuel Cord and a sheriff who works for him." The rifle had lowered slightly. "What did you do?" "Refused to sell my land." The words had come tumbling out then, the whole sorry story spilling from her lips like a confession. The false accusations, the rigged trial, the prison sentence that was really a death sentence for everything she'd built. She'd told him about her father, about the school, about the children who'd cried when Malik had dragged her away. When she'd finished, Gabe had been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd lowered the rifle completely and said something that changed everything. "If you're escaping, I'm coming too." Eliza had stared at him, certain she'd misheard. The wind carried dust across the campsite, and the morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last cool shadows of dawn. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Gabe shouldered his rifle and walked past her to the roan, running his hand along the horse's neck with the easy familiarity of long companionship. "This is Sterling. He's particular about who rides him, but he'll carry us both if we're careful about the weight. I don't understand. You're a stranger. Why would you help me?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she recognized. The same exhaustion that came from fighting a system designed to break you. "Because I know what it's like when the law stops serving justice and starts serving money. Because Samuel Cord isn't the first powerful man to use a badge as a weapon. And because if I let you take Sterling and ride off alone, you'll be dead or back in chains before nightfall. You don't know that. I do. You're running on fear and desperation, and neither one makes for smart traveling." He began gathering supplies from his camp with efficient movements. "How long since you ate a real meal?" Her stomach answered before she could, growling loudly enough that he almost smiled. 3 days, she admitted. "Thought so." Sit down before you fall down. I'll make coffee, and we'll talk about how to keep you alive." She'd wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own, but her legs were trembling and her head felt light. She sank onto a flat rock near the fire while Gabe worked. He moved like a man who'd spent years alone, each action deliberate and practiced. The coffee he poured into a tin cup was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and real, and she wrapped her hands around the cup like it was salvation itself. "You said you know about men like Cord," she said after her first sip. "How?" Gabe was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. "I used to be a U.S. Marshal, 17 years wearing the badge. I believed in it once, thought the law was the thin line between civilization and chaos. What changed? I arrested a man named Thomas Chen for murder. Chinese fellow, worked on the railroad, had a small shop in Carson City. His neighbor, a man named William Hastings, was found dead in Chen's shop. Chen said Hastings had attacked him, that he'd defended himself. The evidence was murky, but Hastings was white and well-connected, and Chen was neither." Eliza felt ice forming in her stomach. "Mrs. Chen in Belridge. Is she his mother? She wrote me letters for 2 years after, begging me to investigate further. I did, in what little time I had. Found out Hastings owed money all over town, had been threatening Chen to pay his debts. Found a witness who'd heard Hastings say he'd take Chen's shop one way or another, but you couldn't prove it. I could prove enough to create reasonable doubt. I went to my superior, asked for a stay of execution so I could gather more evidence. He told me the case was closed, the appeals exhausted. Thomas Chen would hang in 3 days, and I was to stop wasting the government's time." The coffee had gone cold in Eliza's hands. "What did you do?" "I refused to attend the hanging. Turned in my badge instead. Said I wouldn't be part of a system that murdered innocent men to convenience powerful ones." His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could hear the cost beneath the words. "They hanged Thomas Chen anyway. 2 months later, a drunk William Hastings confessed to a bartender that he'd planned the whole thing, that Chen had fought back and accidentally killed him in the struggle. By then I was already in these mountains, and Chen's family had scattered to the wind. I'm sorry," Eliza said, and meant it. Being sorry doesn't bring back the dead or fix broken systems. "But it taught me something important. When the law becomes a tool for the powerful instead of a shield for the weak, good people have a choice. They can bow to it or they can step outside it. Is that what we're doing? Stepping outside it? We're surviving it. There's a difference." He handed her a piece of jerky and some hardtack. "Eat, then we need to move." As she ate, Gabe explained his plan. They'd head west, away from Belridge and the main roads where Cord's men would be searching. The territory was vast, and most of it was empty desert and mountain. Gabe knew the hidden springs and game trails, the places where a person could disappear if they were careful. "How long do we run?" she asked. "Until we find a place where Cord's money doesn't reach, or until we find evidence to clear your name." "That could be never." "Could be," he agreed. "You want to go back and face prison instead?" She thought of that cell, of the years stretching ahead in some territorial prison where guards looked the other way when men like Cord wanted problems eliminated. "No." "Then we run." They were packing the last of the supplies when Eliza noticed it, a faint cloud of dust on the eastern horizon. Gabe saw it at the same moment, his body going still in that particular way of men who'd lived close to danger. "Riders," he said quietly. "Maybe 6, moving fast. Cord's men? Or bounty hunters?" "Word travels fast when there's reward money." He worked quickly, securing packs to the horses. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they reach this camp. Less if they're good trackers." Eliza felt panic rising in her throat. "What do we do?" "We make sure they can't follow us." Gabe led both horses to the nearby creek, walking them upstream through the shallow water. Eliza followed, her boots soaking through immediately. They traveled upstream for nearly a quarter mile before Gabe led them out onto a rocky shelf that would hide their tracks. "They'll search the camp. See, we left in a hurry," he explained as they mounted, Eliza on the pack horse, Gabe on Sterling. "They'll try to track us, but the water and rock will slow them down." By the time they figure out which direction we went, we'll have enough lead to disappear. They rode hard for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the camp. The terrain grew rougher, all broken rock and steep ravines. Eliza had ridden horses before, but never like this. Never at speed over dangerous ground, with her life depending on staying in the saddle. When Gabe finally slowed them to a walk, she was trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline both. Or do you think we lost them? For now. But there'll be others. He pointed to a high ridge in the distance. We'll make camp up there tonight. Good vantage point, hard to approach without being seen. As they climbed toward the ridge, the reality of her situation settled over Eliza like a heavy blanket. She was a fugitive now, truly and completely. Everything she'd known, her home, her students, her reputation was gone. All she had was this stranger and his promise to help, and even that felt as insubstantial as morning mist. "Gabe," she said as they reached the top of the ridge, "why are you really doing this?" "The truth." He dismounted and began unsaddling Sterling, his movements practiced and sure. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet but steady. "Because 17 years ago I stood by while an innocent man died, and I've been running from that failure ever since. Maybe helping you is a way to make amends. Or maybe I'm just tired of being alone with my guilt." He looked at her directly. "Does the reason matter?" "I suppose not," she said. "As long as you keep your word, I will," he promised. "If you're escaping, I'm coming too." "That's not just words, Miss Turner. That's an oath." And watching him work in the fading light, preparing their camp with the careful attention of a man who'd survived by being thorough, Eliza allowed herself to believe him. She had no choice, really. He was all she had between freedom and a noose. By the time they'd made camp and eaten a sparse meal of dried meat and stale bread, full darkness had settled over the desert. Eliza wrapped herself in a blanket Gabe had given her and stared up at stars so bright and numerous they seemed to press down from the sky. "Get some sleep," Gabe said from his position near the horses. "I'll take first watch." "When do I take watch?" "You don't, not yet. Right now you need rest more than I need help." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "Save your strength. Tomorrow's going to be harder than today, and the day after harder still. That's the nature of running. It doesn't get easier, just more necessary." She closed her eyes, certain she was too anxious to sleep. But exhaustion pulled her under within minutes, and she dreamed of her schoolroom, of children's laughter, of a life that already felt as distant as childhood itself. In her dreams, the wanted poster on the wall kept changing. Sometimes it was her face, sometimes Thomas Chen's, sometimes just a blank space where a person used to be, when she woke in the darkness to the sound of horses moving nervously. Gabe was already on his feet, rifle in hand, staring down at the desert below, where tiny points of firelight marked the camps of men hunting them in the night. Morning came with the kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer and waver like water. Eliza woke stiff and sore, every muscle protesting yesterday's hard riding. Gabe was already awake, crouched at the edge of their camp, studying the desert below through an old brass spyglass. "They're still down there," he said without looking at her. "Camped about 3 miles south. Looks like they split into 2 groups during the night. One's heading toward the main trail, the other's circling west." Eliza joined him at the edge, shading her eyes against the glare. She could just make out the distant figures moving like ants across the pale earth. "How many?" "8 that I can count. Could be more we can't see." He collapsed the spyglass and turned to face her. "We'll need to swing north, put more distance between us and them. There's rougher country that way, but it'll be harder for them to track us." "How rough?" "The kind where a wrong step can break a horse's leg or send you sliding down a ravine. You ever done any real desert riding?" "I've ridden to town and back," she said, hearing how inadequate that sounded even as she said it. Gabe almost smiled. "That's what I figured." "All right then. Today you're going to learn. First lesson in country like this, the horse knows more than you do. Trust Sterling's instincts. If he balks at something, there's usually a reason. They ate a cold breakfast, no fire, nothing that might create smoke to give away their position, and were riding before the sun cleared the eastern peaks. True to Gabe's warning, the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. They picked their way down the ridge, using a narrow game trail that seemed to disappear entirely in places, then crossed a stretch of loose shale that shifted and clattered beneath the horses' hooves. Eliza's hands ached from gripping the reins so tightly. Her legs trembled from the constant effort of staying balanced in the saddle. Twice she nearly fell when her horse stumbled, and only Gabe's quick hand on her arm kept her mounted. "You're doing fine," he said during a brief rest in the shadow of a massive boulder. "Most people would have quit by now. I don't have the luxury of quitting." "No," he agreed. "None of us do." As they rode through the long morning, Gabe taught her things her father had never mentioned. How to read the land for water sources, the green smudge of vegetation in a dry wash, the flight pattern of birds in early morning. How to spot the difference between a safe path and a dangerous one by the way rocks weathered and cracked. How to conserve her energy in the saddle, moving with the horse rather than fighting it. "Your father," Gabe said during one of their stops. "You said he was a surveyor. He'd teach you any of his craft?" "Some. He'd take me with him sometimes when I was younger, before my mother passed. He taught me how to read a compass, how to triangulate position using landmarks." She pulled the brass compass from her pocket, holding it carefully. It was one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep through her arrest and escape. Gabe took it gently, turning it in his weathered hands. The compass was old but well-maintained, its brass case engraved with words around the rim. "True north lies in the heart," he read aloud. "Your father's philosophy." He said that instruments could tell you direction, but they couldn't tell you the right way to go. That required something deeper. She took the compass back, running her thumb over the engraving. "He died trying to mediate a boundary dispute between two ranches. Got caught in the crossfire when they started shooting at each other. I'm sorry. He believed people could resolve their differences through reason and fair dealing. Turned out he was wrong, at least in that case." She tucked the compass away. "Still, I keep it. Helps me remember what he tried to teach me, even if the world doesn't always work that way." "Your father wasn't wrong," Gabe said quietly. "The world just makes it hard to be right." They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Eliza found herself studying her unlikely companion. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. His face was weathered and lined, but there was strength in it, and something else, a kind of careful watchfulness that never fully relaxed. "How long have you been alone in these mountains?" she asked. 5 years, give or take. Long enough to forget some things. Not long enough to forget others. Don't you get lonely? Loneliness is preferable to the alternative, which is being around people who remind you of your failures. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Out here, the only person I can disappoint is myself. By midday, they'd put considerable distance between themselves and the riders, but Gabe remained cautious. He led them through a narrow canyon, where the walls rose so high on either side that the sky became a ribbon of blue overhead. Their voices echoed strangely in that confined space, and the horses' hooves rang against stone. "There's water ahead," Gabe said. "A spring I used to visit when I was ranging through here. We'll rest there, let the horses drink their fill." The spring appeared like a small miracle in the desert, a clear pool fed by water seeping from a crack in the canyon wall, surrounded by ferns and moss that seemed impossibly green against all that red rock. Eliza slid from her horse with a groan, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "Hurts, doesn't it?" Gabe said, not unkindly. "You'll be sore for a few days until your body adjusts. I feel like I've been beaten with a club, close enough." He knelt by the spring, filled their canteens, then splashed water on his face and neck. "But you're keeping up. That counts for something." While the horses drank, Eliza sat with her back against the canyon wall and closed her eyes. The cool air rising from the spring felt like a blessing. She could hear water trickling, birds singing somewhere above, the soft sound of the horses moving. "Gabe," she said without opening her eyes. "What happened to Thomas Chen's mother?" "Mrs. Chen, the one in Belridge. She's still there, far as I know. I send her money when I can, through a banker in Silver City. Not that money can make up for what the law took from her. She spoke for me at the trial. Nobody else would. But she stood up and told the judge I was a good woman, that I'd never steal from anyone. The judge ignored her, but I won't forget it. She's good people, Gabe said. Her and her daughter both. They know what it costs to stand up for right when wrong has all the power behind it. They rested for an hour, then pressed on. The afternoon brought more hard riding, more treacherous ground, and finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they spotted smoke signals rising in the distance. Gabe reined Sterling to a halt, studying the thin columns of smoke with narrowed eyes. That's bad. What does it mean? It means they're coordinating. Multiple groups, communicating about search patterns. He counted under his breath. 3 distinct signal points. They're trying to box us in, herd us toward something. Toward what? Probably a canyon or valley with limited exits. Classic tactic. Drive your quarry into a trap, then close it. He turned Sterling's head north. We're not going to cooperate. Change your plans. We're heading into high country, steeper terrain, where they can't coordinate as easily. As they rode toward the distant mountains, Eliza felt the weight of pursuit pressing against her back. Somewhere behind them, men were hunting her with systematic precision, and they had resources she couldn't match. All she had was this ex-marshal and his promise to keep running. But looking at Gabe's determined profile, watching the way he read the land and adjusted their route with practiced skill, she felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not just gratitude, though there was that. Something else. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of trust, Gabe, she said as the sun touched the peaks ahead. Thank you. For all of this, I know you don't owe me anything. Maybe I don't owe you, he replied. But I owe someone. Might as well be you. It wasn't a declaration of friendship or loyalty, but somehow it felt more honest than empty promises would have been. Eliza found herself smiling despite everything. By the 3rd day, they'd reached the remnants of an old mining settlement tucked into a fold of the mountains. The buildings were little more than weathered frames and collapsed roofs, long abandoned to the wind and sun. But there was a stable with 3 walls still standing and a well that Gabe tested and declared clean enough to drink. We'll rest here, he said, leading Sterling into the dubious shelter of the stable. The horses need it, and so do you. Eliza didn't argue. Her entire body felt like one continuous bruise, and exhaustion had settled into her bones. While Gabe tended to the horses, she explored the ruins. Most of the buildings had been stripped of anything useful long ago, but in what might have once been the assayer's office, she found a few items overlooked by previous scavengers. A rusted lantern, some nails in a leather pouch and tucked inside a rotting desk drawer. A worn photograph. She lifted it carefully. The image showed a woman holding a small child, both smiling at the camera. The woman was perhaps 30, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple style. The child couldn't have been more than 3, clutching a wooden toy horse. Find something? Eliza startled at Gabe's voice. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the shadows. Just an old photograph. I was going to leave it. Let me see. She handed it to him and watched something shift in his expression. His jaw tightened. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the photograph. Who are they? She asked gently. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my sister Margaret, and her son Thomas, named after Thomas Chen. She knew his family, thought it would honor his memory. I didn't know you had family. I don't, not anymore. He stared at the photograph as if it could burn him. They died 7 years ago. Fever swept through the town where they lived. Margaret wrote me letters saying Thomas was sick, asking me to come. But I was in the middle of a manhunt, tracking bank robbers through 3 territories. I sent money instead of going myself. Told myself the job was too important to abandon. Eliza's throat tightened. Gabe. By the time I finished the job and reached them, they were both dead 2 weeks. Buried in a churchyard I'd never even seen. His voice remained steady, but she could hear the cost of that steadiness. Margaret's last letter said Thomas kept asking for Uncle Gabe, kept asking when I was coming. You couldn't have known. I could have chosen differently, could have put family before duty, people before the job. But I didn't. I chose the badge, chose hunting criminals over being there when the people I loved needed me. He handed the photograph back to her. After that, the isolation wasn't a choice. It was penance. Eliza set the photograph down gently on the desk. Is that what you think you deserve? A lifetime alone? I think I don't deserve comfort while they're in the ground. That's guilt talking, not justice. She moved closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. Your sister, Margaret, would she want this for you? Would she want you buried alive in these mountains, punishing yourself forever? What I want doesn't matter. It does to me. The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended. You saved my life. You're risking everything to help a woman you barely know. Whatever you think you failed to do 7 years ago, you're making different choices now. It doesn't bring them back. No, she agreed. Nothing will. But running from life isn't the same as living, Gabe. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let that guilt bury you, or whether you're going to honor their memory by actually living. He was quiet for so long, she thought she'd overstepped, pushed too hard on wounds too raw. Then he said very softly, "You sound like Margaret. She was always telling me I thought too much and felt too little, that I'd turned myself into a badge with legs instead of a man with a heart." Was she right? Probably. He turned away, but not before she saw the grief naked on his face. "I'm going to scout the perimeter. Stay inside, out of sight." He left before she could respond. And Eliza stood alone in the ruined office, holding the photograph of people she'd never met, but whose absence had shaped the man now protecting her. She understood something about Gabe in that moment, understood why he'd helped her, why he'd abandoned his isolation to run with a stranger. He was trying to rewrite history, to make a different choice than the one that haunted him. When he returned an hour later, his face had returned to its usual careful neutrality. "We've got a problem. Found tracks about a mile east. Fresh, maybe 3 hours old. Someone's been through here recently. Cord's men? Hard to say. Could be prospectors, could be drifters. Could be the men hunting you." He began repacking their supplies. "We'll need to move at first light. Can't risk staying here if—" The sound of horses stopped him mid-sentence. They both froze, listening. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching from the south. Gabe moved to the window, peering carefully through a gap in the boards. 4 riders, he said quietly. "Armed. They're heading straight for the settlement." Eliza felt panic rising. "What do?" "We disappear." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the stable where Sterling and the packhorse stood. "There's old mine tunnels beneath this settlement. Dangerous, probably unstable, but it's the only way out without being seen." They worked quickly and silently, leading the horses through a dark opening at the back of the stable. The tunnel beyond was narrow, forcing them to walk single file with the horses following nervously behind. Eliza could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, could feel the weight of earth and rock pressing down from above. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the mountain's belly. Several times they passed side passages that breathed cold, stale air. Once the ceiling was so low they had to crouch, and Eliza felt the first real taste of claustrophobic terror. Then, finally, blessed daylight. The tunnel opened onto a hillside, a quarter-mile from the settlement, hidden behind a screen of juniper and scrub oak. They emerged blinking into the afternoon sun, and Gabe immediately moved to cover their exit with brush and loose rock. Below, they could see the riders moving through the abandoned buildings, searching methodically. Eliza watched one of them enter the stable where they'd been just minutes before. "That was too close," she whispered. "It's going to keep being close," Gabe replied. "They're not going to give up, and we can't keep running forever." He looked at her seriously. But Sterling took a scrape on his leg in the tunnel. "He's limping. We're going to have to slow down, give him time to heal," which meant their pursuers would gain ground, which meant the next encounter might not end with a narrow escape. Eliza's hand moved unconsciously to the compass in her pocket. "True north lies in the heart," her father had said. But what did you do when every direction led into danger? The smoke signals meant they couldn't keep running blind. Gabe led them into rougher country, climbing higher into the mountains where the air thinned and the vegetation changed from desert scrub to pine and juniper. The terrain was treacherous, loose rock, narrow trails that skirted cliff edges. places where one wrong step could send horse and rider tumbling, but it was also harder for a large group to search systematically, which was exactly what Gabe wanted. "We need supplies," he said, during a brief rest in the shade of a massive boulder. "We're low on everything: food, ammunition, medical supplies. And Sterling needs proper treatment for that leg or the limp will get worse. Where do we get supplies without being seen?" "There's a ranch about 6 miles north of here. Small operation, family outfit. I helped them once, couple years back. Their water pump broke and they were facing a drought summer. I fixed it for them. You think they'll help us?" "I think they're good people. But good people get scared when wanted posters carry big rewards." He studied the distant smoke signals. "Still, we don't have many options. We go tonight, trade for what we need, and disappear before dawn." They waited until dark, then descended from the high country toward the valley where the ranch lay nestled against the mountain's base. Lights glowed in the windows of a modest cabin, and Eliza could see a barn, a corral with a few cattle, and what looked like a decent-sized garden. "Wait here," Gabe said, dismounting. "Let me approach first. They'll be less frightened if they see me alone. What if it's a trap? Then you ride hard and don't look back." He handed her Sterling's reins. "I mean it, Eliza. If something goes wrong, you save yourself." Before she could argue, he was walking toward the cabin, his hands visible and empty. Eliza watched tensely as lamplight spilled across the porch and a man emerged, holding a rifle. There was a long moment of conversation she couldn't hear. Then the man lowered his weapon and called into the house. A woman appeared, wiping her hands on an apron. More conversation. Then, to Eliza's surprise, the woman beckoned toward where Eliza was hiding. Gabe turned and waved her forward. The rancher was a weathered man in his 50s named Jack Morrison, and his wife Sarah had the kind, tired eyes of someone who'd raised children in hard country. They ushered Eliza and Gabe inside quickly, closing the door and drawing the curtains. "You're in serious trouble," Sarah said without preamble, pouring coffee none of them had asked for. "There's wanted posters all over. That rancher, Samuel Cord, he's put up $1,000 for you, dead or alive." "I'm innocent," Eliza said. "He framed me for stealing his cattle so he could take my land." Jack and Sarah exchanged a long look. Then Jack said, "We believe you. Cord's been squeezing small ranchers for years. Some sell out, some don't. Those who don't usually end up losing their land anyway, one way or another. Has he come after you?" "Not yet. We're too small to matter, and our water rights aren't worth his trouble. But it's only a matter of time." Sarah set mugs of coffee in front of them. "We can't give you much. We're barely getting by ourselves. But you helped us when we needed it, Gabe. Least we can do is share what we have." They spent 2 hours in the Morrison cabin, and Eliza felt the tension slowly ease from her shoulders. Jack repacked their supplies with dried beef, flour, coffee, and some vegetables from Sarah's garden. Sarah tended to Sterling's leg with practiced hands, cleaning the wound and applying a poultice that she said would prevent infection. "You'll need to rest him at least 2 more days," Sarah warned. "Don't push him hard or that leg won't heal right." While they worked, Eliza noticed a wanted poster on the table. Her own face stared back at her, the details stark and damning. She picked it up, her hands trembling slightly. "Sarah," she said quietly, "why are you helping us? You could turn me in, collect that reward. $1,000 would change your lives." Sarah looked at her steadily. "Money earned by betraying innocent people isn't money I could spend with a clean conscience. Besides, we've been where you are. Not wanted by the law maybe, but desperate and scared, facing losing everything. When you're in that dark place, the kindness of strangers is the only light you've got." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, the first real tears since this nightmare began. "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Jack said grimly. "One of Cord's men came through here yesterday asking questions. Showed us that poster, asked if we'd seen you. I said no, but he didn't look convinced. You'll need to move on quickly, and don't come back this way. If Cord finds out we helped you, we'll pay for it." As they prepared to leave, Sarah pulled Eliza aside. "You take this," she said, pressing a soft wool shawl into Eliza's hands. "Nights are cold in the high country, and that dress you're wearing won't keep you warm much longer." "I can't take this." "You can, and you will. It was my daughter's. She moved to California last year, married a clerk. She doesn't need it anymore, and you do. Sarah squeezed Eliza's hands. You survived this, you hear me? You survive, and you make sure Samuel Cord pays for what he's done. Not just to you, but to all the people he's hurt. They left under the cover of darkness, following a route Jack had marked on a rough map. As they climbed back into the high country, Eliza wrapped Sarah's shawl around her shoulders and felt the warmth of it, both physical and emotional. You were right about them, she told Gabe. They're good people. Some still are, he replied. Not enough, but some. They rode through the night, putting distance between themselves and the Morrison ranch. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Gabe finally called a halt in a protected hollow among the pines. We'll rest here today, he said. Sterling needs it, and so do we. As they made camp, Eliza found herself watching Gabe with new understanding. He'd said he was broken, that he'd adapted rather than healed. But a truly broken man wouldn't have helped the Morrisons fix their pump, wouldn't have remembered them years later, wouldn't have trusted them with their lives. Maybe, she thought, Gabe Holt wasn't as lost as he believed. Maybe, like Sterling's leg, he just needed time and the right care to heal properly. She wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders and settled down to sleep, feeling safer than she had in days. Somewhere behind them, Cord's men were still hunting. But here, in this moment, she had warmth and shelter and the steady presence of someone who'd chosen to stand with her. It was enough. For now, it was enough. They'd been traveling for 5 days when the rider appeared on the horizon, approaching under a white flag tied to a long branch. Gabe immediately positioned himself between Eliza and the stranger. Rifle ready but not raised. The rider was young, maybe 25. Dressed in clothes that marked him as neither cowboy nor bounty hunter. A town suit, dusty from travel, and a hat that had seen better days. He stopped 50 yards away and called out, I'm looking for Gabriel Holt, formerly U.S. Marshal out of Carson City. I mean no harm. I'm carrying a message from Circuit Judge Harrison. Gabe's jaw tightened, but he didn't lower his weapon. Who are you? Name's Peter Brennan. I'm a courier for the Circuit Court. Judge Harrison sent me to find you specifically. The young man held up a sealed letter. I have information about the charges against Miss Eliza Turner. Important information. Could be a trick, Eliza said quietly. Could be Cord's men. Could be, Gabe agreed. But something in the young man's bearing, in the way he sat his horse and held that letter, struck a chord of memory. Brennan, you worked in the clerk's office in Carson City when I was marshal there. Yes, sir. I was just a kid then, filing papers and running messages. You probably don't remember me. I remember. You were Tom Chen's nephew. His wife's sister's boy. Peter Brennan's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper. You remember that? I remember everything about that case. Gabe lowered his rifle slightly. Come forward. Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them. The young man approached carefully, dismounting when Gabe indicated. Up close, Eliza could see the resemblance to the Chen family. The same dark eyes, the same high cheekbones. He handed the sealed letter to Gabe with steady hands. The judge wanted me to find you before anyone else did, Peter said. He trusts you, even after everything that happened. Says you were the only honest lawman he knew. Gabe broke the seal and read. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression darkened. When he finished, he read it again as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Finally, he handed it to Eliza. The letter was brief and devastating. Marshal Holt, Sheriff Daniel Malik of Belridge, was found dead 3 days ago, shot twice in the back. Evidence suggests he was preparing to confess his involvement in a conspiracy. Miss Turner is now accused of his murder in addition to the cattle theft charges. Reward has been increased to $1,000, dead or alive. However, I have reason to believe Miss Turner is innocent and that Malik was killed by the same men who framed her. Samuel Cord is eliminating witnesses. I can offer Miss Turner a fair trial if you can bring her to the circuit court in Red Mesa within 2 days. After that, jurisdiction passes to territorial courts, which Cord controls. Time is short and the situation grave. Judge Marcus Harrison. Eliza felt the world tilt. They killed Malik? But he was working for Cord. That's exactly why they killed him, Peter interrupted. My uncle Tom Chen, he taught me something before he died. He said guilty men who work for powerful people are always one mistake away from being loose ends. Malik was getting nervous, drinking more, talking too much. Cord couldn't risk him confessing, so they murdered him and blamed me, Eliza said, feeling rage replace shock. Now I'm wanted for killing a lawman, which means every bounty hunter and badge for hire in 3 territories will be hunting you, Gabe said grimly. It's not just about Cord's money anymore. It's about reputation. Whoever brings you in becomes the man who caught a cop killer. Peter nodded. It gets worse. Cord's put out word that you're armed and dangerous, that you've threatened to kill anyone who tries to capture you. He's giving bounty hunters an excuse to shoot first and ask questions never. This is a death sentence, Eliza said, her voice hollow. Unless we reach Judge Harrison, Gabe countered. He's offering a fair trial. That's more than most people in your position get. You trust him. Harrison's one of the few judges who can't be bought. He's old school, believes in the law the way it was meant to be practiced. Gabe studied the map Peter had brought. But Red Mesa is 2 hard days' ride from here, and we'd have to cross open country. Cord's men could spot us easy. There's more, Peter said quietly. Judge Harrison wanted me to tell you something else, Marshal. He's investigated Cord's business dealings. Found a pattern going back 15 years, land disputes, false accusations, convenient deaths. Cord's built an empire on stolen property and murdered opponents. How many? Gabe's voice was tight. At least 20 cases the judge can document. Could be more. But here's the thing, Malik was keeping records. His widow found them hidden in their home. Ledgers showing payments from Cord, details of all the schemes. She's willing to testify, but only if Miss Turner survives to trial. If Miss Turner dies, the widow thinks she'll be next. Eliza pressed her hands to her face, trying to process the enormity of what Peter was saying. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about 2 decades of corruption, about all the people Cord had destroyed, about finally bringing a powerful criminal to justice. Why did Harrison send you? Gabe asked. Why not a marshal or a deputy? Because you're the only one he trusts with this, and because I asked him to let me come. Peter met Gabe's eyes directly. You tried to save my uncle. You turned in your badge rather than participate in his execution. My family has never forgotten that. When I heard you were helping Miss Turner, I wanted to be part of setting things right. Gabe was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he said, This isn't your fight, son. You've delivered the message. You should head back before Cord's men find out you're involved. With respect, Marshal, it became my fight the day they hanged an innocent man and good people looked away. I'm not looking away. Peter's voice was steady, determined. I'm a fair tracker. I know the territory, and I can handle a rifle. Let me help you reach Red Mesa. He's right, Eliza said, finding her voice. We need all the help we can get. And if we're doing this, if we're really going to face Cord in court, we need to do it smart. Gabe looked between them, these 2 young people offering to risk everything for a chance at justice. She saw the conflict in his face, the old guilt warring with new purpose. Finally he nodded. All right, but we do this my way, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood, they said together. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. Gabe spread the map on the ground, studying the routes to Red Mesa. We can't take the direct path, too open, too obvious. We'll swing east, through the Badlands. It's rough country, no water for long stretches, but it's terrain Cord's men avoid because it's so treacherous. That adds half a day to the journey, Peter observed. Better to arrive late than not at all. We'll travel at night when we can, rest during the heat of the day. Sterling's leg is better but not perfect, so we'll need to be careful with him. Gabe traced a route with his finger. There's an old stage station here about halfway. Abandoned now, but it has a good well. We'll rest there, then push hard for Red Mesa. What about Cord's men? Eliza asked. Even if we avoid the main routes, they'll be looking for us. They will. But they're expecting us to run or hide. We're going to do something they won't expect. We're going to head straight for a courtroom and a judge who can't be intimidated. Gabe rolled up the map. This isn't about escaping anymore. This is about confronting. This is about standing up and saying enough. Peter grinned. My uncle would have liked you, Marshall. I liked him too. That's why we're doing this. Gabe stood, offering his hand to Peter. Welcome to the company of fools and fugitives. As they shook hands, Eliza felt something shift inside her. For days, she'd been running, from Cord, from the law, from her own fear. But running had only ever been a temporary solution. At some point, you had to turn and face what was chasing you. They prepared to move out, packing quickly and efficiently. Peter's horse was fresh, which would help their speed. Sterling, though still favoring his injured leg slightly, seemed stronger after days of careful treatment. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust, Eliza looked at her unlikely companions, an ex-marshal carrying old guilt, a young courier honoring his uncle's memory, and herself, a schoolteacher accused of crimes she'd never committed. Gabe, she said as they mounted up. What if we don't make it? What if Cord's men catch us before we reach the judge? Then we'll have tried, he replied simply, and sometimes trying is the only honest thing left to do. They rode east, toward the Badlands, and the long, hard road to Red Mesa. Behind them the smoke signals had stopped, which was somehow more ominous than seeing them. Somewhere Cord's men were regrouping, changing strategy, preparing for whatever came next. But ahead, 2 days away, a judge waited who still believed in justice. And that fragile hope, slim as it was, made all the difference. Eliza touched the compass in her pocket and thought of her father. True north lies in the heart. They were riding toward justice now, toward truth, toward the confrontation that would either save her or destroy her. But at least, finally, they were riding toward something instead of just away. And somehow, that made her feel more alive than she had in days. They rode through the night, pushing hard across terrain that seemed designed to break both horses and spirits. The Badlands lived up to their reputation, endless stretches of cracked earth, gullies that appeared without warning, and rock formations that looked like the bones of some ancient, a fallen world. During one of their brief rest stops, Eliza pulled out her teaching primer, the small book she'd somehow managed to keep through everything. It was battered now, the cover stained and the pages dog-eared, but inside were the names of all her students, along with notes about their progress, their struggles, their small triumphs. That's quite a list, Peter said, glancing over her shoulder. How many students did you teach? 23 last year. This year would have been 27. 3 families moved into the area, and they all had children of school age. She ran her finger down the names, remembering faces. Samuel was learning to read. He'd struggled with letters, but right before I was arrested, he'd finally managed to sound out his first full sentence. He was so proud. You'll get back to them, Peter said with the confidence of youth. Will I? Eliza closed the book gently. Even if the judge clears me, even if we prove Cord's guilt, will those families let their children be taught by a woman who was accused of murder? Will they trust me again? Gabe, who'd been checking Sterling's leg, spoke without turning around. The ones who matter will. The ones who believed in you before will believe in you after. As for the rest, they weren't worth your time. Anyway, that's easy to say when you're not the one facing them. I know exactly what it's like to face people who judge you for things beyond your control. Now he did turn, his expression serious. When I turned in my badge, half the town treated me like a coward. Said I'd disgraced the marshal service, that I was soft on criminals, that I'd let politics interfere with justice. The other half just thought I was crazy. Which half were right? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Point is, I had to decide whether I was going to let their opinions define me, or whether I was going to define myself. You'll face the same choice, Eliza, but you're stronger than you think. They rode on as dawn broke across the Badlands, painting the desolation in shades of rose and gold. The beauty of it struck Eliza as almost cruel. How could something so harsh also be so lovely? But maybe that was the nature of survival. You learned to find beauty in unlikely places, or you broke under the weight of only seeing ugliness. By mid-morning, they'd spotted dust clouds in the distance. Riders definitely, but too far away to identify. Gabe studied them through his spyglass, his jaw tightening. "That's Vance Ridley," he said. "Cord's head bounty hunter. I recognize his gray horse. How many with him?" Peter asked. "Looks like 4, maybe 5. They're moving fast, cutting across country." Gabe lowered the spyglass. "They know where we're headed. They're trying to get ahead of us, set up an ambush. How could they know?" Eliza felt panic rising. "We've been so careful," someone talked. "Maybe someone saw us leaving the Morrison Ranch. Or maybe Cord has more eyes in this territory than we realized." Gabe was already moving, repacking their supplies with urgent efficiency. "We need to change our route. Skip the stage station, push straight through. Sterling's leg," Eliza started. "I know. But if we stop, if we rest, Ridley will catch us. And in a straight fight, we're outgunned." He helped Eliza mount, his hands steadying her when she swayed from exhaustion. "I'm sorry. I know you're tired, but we have to keep moving." They changed course, swinging more to the south, taking paths that were barely paths at all. The horses struggled over loose scree and through thorny vegetation that tore at their legs. More than once, they had to dismount and lead the animals through passages too narrow or too steep to ride. Eliza's feet, already blistered and sore, began to bleed inside her boots. Her hands were raw from holding reins and from catching herself during near falls. Every part of her body hurt, and the exhaustion was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing her down. But she kept going, because the alternative was giving up, and after everything she'd endured, everything she'd lost, giving up felt like the worst betrayal of all. They stopped briefly at midday in the shade of an overhanging rock. Peter produced water and some of Sarah Morrison's dried beef, and they ate mechanically, too tired to taste anything. "Talk to me," Gabe said, looking at Eliza with concern. "You're going pale. Need to know you're still with us." "I'm here." Her voice came out rougher than she'd intended. "Just thinking about what happens tomorrow. When we reach the judge, we tell the truth. We present the evidence. We let justice work the way it's supposed to. And if it doesn't? If the judge doesn't believe us, or if Cord's influence reaches even that far?" Gabe was quiet for a moment. Then we tried. And trying matters, Eliza. It matters that we didn't just accept injustice. It matters that we fought back. Is that what you tell yourself about Thomas Chen? That trying mattered, even though he still died. It was harsh, harsher than she'd meant it to be, and she saw Gabe flinch. But instead of anger, his expression softened into something like understanding. "Yes," he said simply. "Because the alternative is believing nothing matters, that power always wins, that fighting back is pointless. And if I believed that, I'd have put a bullet in my own head years ago rather than living with the guilt. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. You're exhausted and scared. You get to say hard things." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "But hear this. You are going to survive this. You are going to stand in front of that judge and tell your story. And whether we win or lose, whether justice prevails or fails again, you'll know you didn't go quietly. You'll know you made them work for it." Peter cleared his throat. "Marshal, I know it's not my place, but she's right to be afraid. We all are. God's men are close, we're running on fumes. And even if we make it to Red Mesa, there's no guarantee the judge can protect us from a bullet." "You're right. It's not guaranteed." "Nothing is." Gabe swung into his saddle. "But I've lived in those mountains alone for 5 years, hiding from failure and guilt. And you know what I learned. Safety isn't the same as living. Fear isn't the same as wisdom. Sometimes the only way forward is through the thing that scares you most." As they rode through the afternoon, Eliza found herself thinking about Gabe's words. She'd been a teacher, a woman who believed in order and rules and the way things were supposed to work. The law was supposed to protect people like her. The system was supposed to deliver justice, but the system had failed, and the law had become a weapon in Cord's hands. Everything she'd believed about how the world worked had been revealed as naive at best, dangerously foolish at worst. Yet here she was, riding toward a courtroom, toward the very system that had failed her. Because what else was there? Vigilante justice? A lifetime running? Neither option offered the kind of future worth living for. Maybe, she thought, that was what growing up really meant. Not just surviving disappointment, but continuing to fight for ideals, even after you'd seen them corrupted. Not giving up on justice because you'd seen injustice win. As the sun began to set, they spotted the town of Red Mesa in the distance, a scattering of buildings clustered around what looked like a main street, with the courthouse visible even from miles away, its white walls catching the last golden light. "That's it," Peter said. "We're almost there," but almost could be the most dangerous distance of all. They still had to cross open ground, still had to hope Ridley and his men hadn't beaten them there, still had to survive the night and reach the courthouse by morning when Judge Harrison would hear the case. They made camp in a cluster of rocks about 2 miles from town. No fire, no noise, just 3 people and 2 horses huddled together against the cooling night air. Eliza wrapped Sarah Morrison's shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. "Get some sleep," Gabe said softly. "I'll take first watch. I won't be able to sleep. Try anyway. Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day yet." But as exhausted as she was, sleep wouldn't come. Eliza lay on the hard ground, staring up at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and thought about her father. He'd believed in justice, in the power of truth, in the basic goodness of people. Those beliefs had gotten him killed when he'd tried to mediate between feuding ranchers. Was she making the same mistake? Trusting in systems and people who might not deserve that trust? "Can't sleep either?" Gabe's voice came from nearby. "No, too many thoughts. Want to share them?" She sat up, pulling the shawl close. "I was thinking about my father, about how his faith in people got him killed. Wondering if I'm being just as naive." Gabe was quiet for a moment. "Then your father wasn't naive. He was brave. There's a difference. Naive means not understanding the risks. Brave means understanding them and trying anyway. Is that what we're doing? Being brave? I don't know what we're doing. But I know I'd rather die trying to do the right thing than live knowing I took the easy way out." He shifted, and in the starlight she could see his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the tired slump of his shoulders. "These past few days, riding with you, fighting for something that matters. It's the first time in years I've felt like myself. The real me, the one who wore that badge because he believed in it. Not just because it paid." "Gabe," she said softly, "what happens after? If we win, I mean. What do you do then?" "I don't know. Haven't let myself think that far ahead. Maybe you should. Maybe we both should." She reached out in the darkness, found his hand, held it. "Because I'm going to need someone to help me rebuild. Someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and fight to get it back." His hand tightened around hers. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you to consider it. To consider that maybe penance has an ending, that maybe you've suffered enough for choices that weren't entirely yours to control. Eliza, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. Think about what comes after survival, after justice, after we've fought all the fights." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "Think about building something instead of just protecting the ruins." She lay back down, pulling the shawl over her like a blanket. This time, somehow, sleep came, restless and full of dreams, but sleep nonetheless. She woke to Gabe's hand on her shoulder, gentle but urgent. "Time to go. Sun's almost up, and we need to reach the courthouse before Cord's men realize we're here." They rode into Red Mesa as dawn broke. 3 weary riders on tired horses, carrying nothing but hope and determination and a fierce refusal to let power crush truth. The town was just waking, shop owners sweeping porches, a rooster crowing somewhere, smoke beginning to rise from breakfast fires. The courthouse stood at the end of the main street, white and solid and imposing. Eliza looked at it and felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Everything she'd run from, everything she'd fought for, everything she'd lost and hoped to regain, it all came down to what happened in that building. "Ready?" Gabe asked. "No," she thought. But she said yes, because ready or not, this was happening. They dismounted and walked toward the courthouse steps. And with each step, Eliza felt the weight of the past week lifting, replaced by something else. Not confidence exactly, but purpose. She was done running, done hiding, Done letting fear make her choices. Samuel Cord had taken her land, her reputation, her freedom. But he couldn't take her truth. And today, finally, she would speak it. Everyone dropped, instinct overriding thought. The gunshot had come from the back of the courtroom, and chaos erupted instantly. People screamed, pushed toward the exits. The bailiff drew his weapon, searching for the shooter. Eliza felt Gabe's body covering hers, protecting her. "Stay down," he hissed. Another shot, then another. She heard glass breaking, wood splintering. Through the confusion, she saw Ridley and his men on their feet, weapons drawn. But they weren't shooting. They were trying to escape, because standing in the doorway, rifle raised, was Samuel Cord himself. He'd aged since Eliza had last seen him, his hair grayer, his face harder. But those cold eyes were the same, and the rifle in his hands was steady despite his years. "Nobody moves," Cord said, his voice carrying easily over the chaos. "Especially not that ledger." Harrison, to his credit, didn't flinch. "Mr. Cord, you're interfering with a court proceeding. Put down that weapon." "I don't think so, Your Honor. That ledger is a forgery, and I won't let it destroy my reputation." Cord's eyes swept the room, landing on Harriet Malik. "Your husband was a drunk and a liar, Harriet. Whatever fantasies he wrote in that book are documented facts," Harrison interrupted. "Bank records will prove it. You've lost, Cord. Surrender now, and I'll make sure you get a fair trial." "Fair trial?" Cord laughed, the sound bitter. "There's no such thing, not when you've got money and power arrayed against you. I built an empire in this territory. I'm not going to watch it collapse because of some lies from a dead sheriff and a woman who doesn't know her place." Gabe slowly stood, positioning himself between Cord and Eliza. "It's over. You're cornered. Every person in this room is a witness. Shoot anyone and you'll hang for murder. I'm not leaving here in chains," Cord said flatly. "And neither is that ledger." Peter Brennan, who'd been sitting quietly in the gallery, spoke up. "You know what's interesting, Mr. Cord? My uncle, Thomas Chen, he kept records too. Not as detailed as Sheriff Malik's, but enough. Records showing how you accused him of stealing from your warehouse, how you pressured the Marshal Service to arrest him, how you bought witnesses." Cord's rifle swung toward Peter. "That case is closed. Chen was hanged for his crimes." "For crimes you invented," Peter said, standing. His voice was steady, fearless. "You wanted his shop for your business expansion. He refused to sell, so you framed him for theft. It's the same pattern over and over. How many people have you destroyed, Mr. Cord? How many lives ruined so you could add another acre, another building, another piece of property to your collection?" Those people were weak. They didn't understand that in this territory, the strong take what they need. "No," Eliza said, finding her voice, rising to stand beside Gabe. "The strong protect the weak. The strong use their power for good, not to crush anyone in their way. You're not strong, Mr. Cord. You're a bully and a coward, and today, finally, you're going to face justice." Cord's face twisted with rage. His finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next occurred so fast that later people would argue about the sequence. Gabe lunged forward, trying to reach Cord before he could shoot. Ridley, perhaps seeing his employer about to commit murder in a courtroom full of witnesses, shouted, "No," and moved toward him. The bailiff raised his own weapon. The rifle went off, the bullet gouging a furrow in the wooden floor. Then everyone was moving. Gabe tackled Cord, wrestling for control of the weapon. Ridley and his men, perhaps deciding that loyalty to Cord wasn't worth hanging for, actually helped subdue him. Within moments, Samuel Cord was on the floor, the rifle kicked away, the bailiff's gun pressed to his temple. "Don't move," the bailiff said. "Not 1 inch." Harrison's gavel came down like thunder. "Order! Everyone resume your seats, or I'll have this courtroom cleared." Gradually, the chaos subsided. Cord was hauled to his feet, hands shackled behind his back. His expression had gone from rage to something else. Shock, perhaps. That his power had finally failed him. "Samuel Cord," Harrison said, his voice formal and final. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and suspicion of involvement in the death of Sheriff Daniel Malik. You will be held in custody pending a full investigation." "Bailiff, take him away," As Cord was led from the courtroom, he passed Eliza. For just a moment their eyes met. She saw hatred there and disbelief, and something that might have been fear. Good, she thought. Let him be afraid. Let him know what it feels like to lose everything. Harrison turned to her. Miss Turner, in light of the evidence presented, I am dismissing all charges against you. You are free to go. The words didn't seem real. Eliza stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. Free! After everything, after all the running and fear and desperation, she was free. Gabe's hand found hers, squeezed gently. You did it, he said softly. But you survived. And finally the tears came. Everyone dropped, instinct overriding thought. The gunshot had come from the back of the courtroom, and chaos erupted instantly. People screamed, pushed toward the exits. The bailiff drew his weapon, searching for the shooter. Eliza felt Gabe's body covering hers, protecting her. Stay down, he hissed. Another shot, then another. She heard glass breaking, wood splintering. Through the confusion, she saw Ridley and his men on their feet, weapons drawn. But they weren't shooting. They were trying to escape, because standing in the doorway, rifle raised, was Samuel Cord himself. He'd aged since Eliza had last seen him, his hair grayer, his face harder. But those cold eyes were the same, and the rifle in his hands was steady despite his years. Nobody moves, Cord said, his voice carrying easily over the chaos. Especially not that ledger. Harrison, to his credit, didn't flinch. Mr. Cord, you're interfering with a court proceeding. Put down that weapon. I don't think so, Your Honor. That ledger is a forgery, and I won't let it destroy my reputation. Cord's eyes swept the room, landing on Harriet Malik. Your husband was a drunk and a liar, Harriet. Whatever fantasies he wrote in that book are documented facts, Harrison interrupted. Bank records will prove it. You've lost, Cord. Surrender now, and I'll make sure you get a fair trial. Fair trial? Cord laughed, the sound bitter. There's no such thing, not when you've got money and power arrayed against you. I built an empire in this territory. I'm not going to watch it collapse because of some lies from a dead sheriff and a woman who doesn't know her place. Gabe slowly stood, positioning himself between Cord and Eliza. It's over. You're cornered. Every person in this room is a witness. Shoot anyone and you'll hang for murder. I'm not leaving here in chains, Cord said flatly. And neither is that ledger. Peter Brennan, who'd been sitting quietly in the gallery, spoke up. You know what's interesting, Mr. Cord? My uncle, Thomas Chen, he kept records too. Not as detailed as Sheriff Malik's, but enough. Records showing how you accused him of stealing from your warehouse, how you pressured the Marshal Service to arrest him, how you bought witnesses. Cord's rifle swung toward Peter. That case is closed. Chen was hanged for his crimes, for crimes you invented, Peter said, standing. His voice was steady, fearless. You wanted his shop for your business expansion. He refused to sell, so you framed him for theft. It's the same pattern over and over. How many people have you destroyed, Mr. Cord? How many lives ruined so you could add another acre, another building, another piece of property to your collection? Those people were weak. They didn't understand that in this territory, the strong take what they need. No, Eliza said, finding her voice rising to stand beside Gabe. The strong protect the weak. The strong use their power for good, not to crush anyone in their way. You're not strong, Mr. Cord. You're a bully and a coward, and today, finally, you're going to face justice. Cord's face twisted with rage. His finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next occurred so fast that later people would argue about the sequence. Gabe lunged forward, trying to reach Cord before he could shoot. Ridley, perhaps seeing his employer about to commit murder in a courtroom full of witnesses, shouted "No!" and moved toward him. The bailiff raised his own weapon. The rifle went off, the bullet gouging a furrow in the wooden floor. Then everyone was moving. Gabe tackled Cord, wrestling for control of the weapon. Ridley and his men, perhaps deciding that loyalty to Cord wasn't worth hanging for, actually helped subdue him. Within moments, Samuel Cord was on the floor, the rifle kicked away, the bailiff's gun pressed to his temple. "Don't move," the bailiff said. "Not 1 inch." Harrison's gavel came down like thunder. "Order! Everyone resume your seats or I'll have this courtroom cleared." Gradually the chaos subsided. Cord was hauled to his feet, hands shackled behind his back. His expression had gone from rage to something else. Shock, perhaps, that his power had finally failed him. "Samuel Cord," Harrison said, his voice formal and final, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and suspicion of involvement in the death of Sheriff Daniel Malik. You will be held in custody pending a full investigation. Bailiff, take him away." As Cord was led from the courtroom, he passed Eliza. For just a moment their eyes met. She saw hatred there, and disbelief, and something that might have been fear. Good, she thought. Let him be afraid. Let him know what it feels like to lose everything. Harrison turned to her. "Miss Turner, in light of the evidence presented, I am dismissing all charges against you. You are free to go." The words didn't seem real. Eliza stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. Free! After everything, after all the running and fear and desperation, she was free. Gabe's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "You did it," he said softly. "You survived." And finally the tears came. 6 weeks had passed since the trial. 6 weeks of testimony, depositions, and investigations as Judge Harrison methodically dismantled Samuel Cord's empire. The victims came forward, emboldened by Eliza's courage. The banker who'd held Cord's mortgages turned state's evidence. Cord's foreman confessed to participating in multiple schemes. One by one, the layers of corruption were peeled back. Cord himself sat in a cell in the territorial prison, awaiting trial for murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Harriet Malik's ledger had been just the beginning. Eliza stood on the porch of her reclaimed home, watching the sun set over land that was legally hers again. The court had returned her property with an official apology. The cattle that had been stolen had been sold at auction, and the proceeds returned to her. It wasn't everything she'd lost, but it was enough to start rebuilding. The school had reopened 2 weeks ago. Not all the families had sent their children back. Some still whispered about the accusations, still couldn't quite believe in her innocence despite the judge's ruling. But most had returned. Samuel, the boy who'd struggled with reading, had greeted her with a hug so fierce it had nearly knocked her over. "Mrs. Turner," he'd said, his gap-toothed grin wide, "I practiced while you were gone. Want to hear me read?" She'd cried then, unable to help herself. These children, this small schoolhouse, these simple moments of teaching and learning, they were what mattered. They were what Cord had tried to steal from her, and what she'd fought so hard to reclaim. Now standing on her porch, with evening coming on, she heard hoofbeats approaching. She knew who it was before she saw him. Over the past weeks, Gabe had been a constant presence, helping repair fences, mending the roof, teaching her practical skills for running a ranch alone. But he'd been careful too, keeping a respectful distance, never presuming. He rode up on Sterling, who'd healed completely from his injury. The roan looked healthy and strong, and Gabe himself seemed different somehow, less haunted. The lines around his eyes had softened, and he smiled more readily. "Evening," he said, dismounting. "Thought you might like some company." "Always," she replied, and meant it. They sat on the porch steps, watching the light fade from the sky. The silence between them was comfortable, easy in the way it gets between people who've been through fire together. "I got a letter today," Gabe said after a while, "from Judge Harrison. He's offering me a position as a marshal again. Says the territory needs honest lawmen, and he remembers what I stood for." Eliza's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "That's wonderful. You must be pleased. I don't know what I am." He was quiet for a moment. 5 years ago I would have jumped at the chance, would have seen it as redemption, as proof I could still make a difference. But now I'm not sure that's what I want. The badge, the authority, the constant travel. It cost me everything once. Cost me Margaret and Thomas, cost me my faith in the system. I'm not sure I want to give it that power over me again. What do you want? He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were very dark and very serious. "I want what I've had these past weeks. I want to wake up in the morning and fix fence lines. I want to teach children how to track deer and read the weather. He stopped, struggling for words. "I want to build something instead of just fighting to keep the world from falling apart." Gabe Holt, Eliza said softly. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that if you meant what you said that night before the trial, about needing someone to help you rebuild, about building something together, then I'd like to take you up on that. If the offer's still open, it's open, she said, her throat tight with emotion. It's been open since the moment you lowered your rifle and said you were coming with me. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. I love you, Eliza Turner. I think I have since I watched you stand up to that prosecutor in the courtroom, since I saw you refuse to break, no matter what they threw at you. You're the strongest, bravest person I've ever met. I love you too, she whispered. You saved my life in more ways than one. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, like she was something precious. And she kissed him back, pouring into it all the gratitude and hope and love she'd been holding inside, when they finally pulled apart. The stars were coming out overhead, bright and infinite in the clear desert sky. So what do we do now? Gabe asked. Now we live, Eliza said simply. We teach children and raise cattle and fix things when they break. We have Sunday dinners and argue about whose turn it is to milk the cow. We do all the ordinary, beautiful, mundane things that make up a life. Sounds perfect. It won't be perfect. There will be hard times, setbacks, challenges. People in town will gossip. Some will never fully accept us. I know, but we'll face it together. That's what matters. 3 months later, they were married in the small church in town, with Peter Brennan standing as Gabe's best man and Sarah Morrison helping Eliza with her dress. It was a simple ceremony, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. They honeymooned by riding up into the mountains where Gabe had lived alone for so long. They camped under the stars, cooked over open fires, and talked about the future they were building together. What do you think your sister would say? Eliza asked one night as they lay side by side, looking up at the Milky Way. Margaret? Gabe considered. She'd say it's about time I stopped punishing myself and started actually living. She'd like you. Would have said you were exactly the kick in the pants I needed. I like her already. On the porch of Eliza's home, their home now, her father's compass sat on a small table. True north lies in the heart, the engraving read. And looking at Gabe, at the life they were building together, Eliza knew they'd finally found it. They'd found their true north not in running away, but in running toward each other. Not in isolation, but in connection. Not in fear, but in love. The schoolhouse bell rang in the distance, calling children to morning lessons. Eliza smiled. Tomorrow she'd teach arithmetic and spelling. Tomorrow Gabe would repair the stable door that had been sticking. Tomorrow they'd have the Morrisons over for supper, and Peter had promised to stop by with news from the territorial capital. Tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Just ordinary days, strung together like beads on a string, making up the beautiful, hard-won, precious thing called a life. And that, Eliza thought as she took Gabe's hand and walked toward the schoolhouse together, was more than enough. It was everything.